The stale air in the conference room tastes like failure and old coffee. It hangs heavy, thick with unspoken things. My parents sit across the polished table, their faces a mask of forced patience, maybe slight annoyance. They think this is about something else, something minor. They think I need help. They think they hold all the cards, like always. My lawyer sits beside me, silent, a rock. Across from them, their lawyer, looking smug, already calculating his bill. My mother taps a manicured finger on the table. So, she begins, her voice cool, the tone she uses when she's about to dismiss something inconvenient. What exactly is this urgent meeting about? Your father and I are very busy. My father nods, eyes narrowed just slightly. He looks tired. The years running the franchise have done that. But there's still that spark of the self-made man, the one who built an empire from nothing, or so the story goes. He built an empire, maybe, but he also built walls higher than any castle around his heart. I look at them, really look, the couple who gave me life, who fed and clothed me, who also taught me the coldest lessons without ever meaning to. Or maybe they did mean to. I still don't know. I clear my throat. My voice is steady, surprising even myself. Years of practice, keeping the tremor out. It's about the business, I say. They exchange a look. Confusion. What about the business? My father asks. Are you finally interested in joining the family? There's a hint of condescension there, wrapped in false hope. They never thought I was good enough for the business, not really. Too soft, too much of a dreamer. Yes, I say. Very interested. Their lawyer clears his throat. Perhaps you should get to the point, he prompts, clearly eager to wrap this up. He probably thinks I'm asking for a loan.
A job.
A handout. I reach into my briefcase, the worn leather feeling solid under my fingers. I pull out the documents, crisp and official. I slide them across the table. Not to their lawyer.
To them.
My mother picks up the top page, her brow furrowing. My father leans closer, reading over her shoulder. The room is silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the frantic, suddenly loud thumping of my own heart against my ribs. Their faces drain of color. The forced patience shatters. Annoyance twists into disbelief. Disbelief curdles into something like horror. My mother whispers, her voice thin, reedy, unrecognizable. What is this? My father grabs the paper, his hand trembling. He scans it, his eyes wide and wild. He looks up at me, his expression one I've never seen before. Utter, complete shock, mixed with the dawning of a terrible understanding.
You
can't, he stammers. My lawyer leans forward for the first time, his voice quiet, measured. As the documents indicate, he says, his words slicing through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel, my client, through her holding company, has acquired controlling interest in the parent corporation that owns the franchise system. He pauses, letting the words sink in. Which means, he continues, as of today, she is the majority shareholder and holds the ultimate authority over all franchise operations. Including yours. My parents just stare at the papers. At me. Their world is tilting. The ground is falling away beneath them. The empire they built, the one they prioritized over everything, over me, is no longer theirs. The lawyer is still talking, explaining the clauses, the transition, the new reporting structure. His words are just noise. I watch my parents. My mother's hand goes to her chest. My father looks like he might have a stroke. Their lawyer is sputtering, grabbing for the papers, clearly blindsided. This wasn't his briefing. This wasn't the script he was given. This isn't about a loan or a job. This is about ownership. Complete. Irrevocable. I didn't just get my tuition paid. I bought the whole damn school. If this story hits close to home, or if you've ever felt this kind of turning point, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Before the conference room, before the documents, before the cold satisfaction that tasted like ash, there was just home. A home built on the bedrock of expectation and the shifting sands of conditional love. Our house wasn't grand, but it was comfortable, solid. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery franchise downstairs often wafted up, a constant reminder of the family legacy, the source of our comfort. My parents ran a successful chain of bakeries. Not just one store, but a whole regional franchise operation they had built over 20 years. They started with nothing, they always reminded me. Just grit and flour and early mornings. They were proud of it, fiercely, religiously proud. The business was the third child in our family, maybe the favorite. It demanded everything, and they gave it everything. Growing up, I spent weekends sweeping floors, counting inventory, learning the customer names. It was expected. It was family. I didn't resent it.
Not then.
I saw their dedication, the long hours, the sheer effort. I admired it. I thought it was building something for us. For the future. My future. My dream wasn't the bakery. I respected it, but it wasn't my passion. I wanted to study history, maybe archaeology. Big, dusty, impractical dreams, my father called them, with a chuckle that didn't quite reach his eyes. But they always said, get into a good school. Work hard. We'll take care of it. The promise was implicit, woven into the fabric of our lives. Education was important, they said. A good degree was the key. I worked hard. I got good grades. I pored over university brochures, imagining myself walking ancient paths, uncovering forgotten stories. My acceptance letter to the university felt like a golden ticket. It wasn't Ivy League, but it was respected, had a good program, and it felt like my path finally opening up. I remember holding the thick envelope, tears stinging my eyes, rushing to show my parents. They were sitting at the kitchen table, buried in spreadsheets, the familiar hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Look, I burst out, holding the letter like a sacred text. I got in. My mother looked up, a tired smile on her face. That's nice, dear. My father nodded, not even lifting his head.
Good job.
Now, about these supplier costs. The initial lack of fanfare stung, but I brushed it off. They were busy. They'd celebrate later. We talked logistics over dinner. Room and board, textbooks, tuition. It was expensive. I knew that. But they had the business. They had built this life. This was what it was for, right? Funding the next generation's leap. Don't worry about the cost, my father said, finally looking at me, a brief, weary smile touching his lips. That's our part. Relief washed over me. The promise, finally explicit. The future felt solid again. I spent the next few months buzzing with excitement, picking classes, contacting roommates, buying dorm essentials. The university was set to start in the fall. It was late spring. Everything felt aligned, perfect. Then came the conversation. It was abrupt. Out of the blue. I was packing a box of books for storage. My mother called me downstairs. She and my father were sitting in the living room, the air different, heavy. The smiles were gone. Their faces were grim. We need to talk, my father said. My stomach clenched. This was it. The shoe dropping. It's about university, my mother said, picking up the thread. Her voice was tight. We've been looking at the numbers. Numbers. Always numbers. The business isn't doing as well as we'd hoped this quarter, my father explained, his voice flat. Supplier costs are up. Foot traffic is down in the newer locations, he went on, listing figures, percentages, market trends. It sounded like a business report, not a conversation about my future. What does this mean? I asked, the knot in my stomach tightening into a hard ball of dread. My mother sighed, a long, put-upon sound. It means, she said, looking away, towards the framed photo of the first bakery on the mantelpiece, we can't afford to send you this year. The world stopped spinning. The air left the room.
You
can't afford it. My voice was barely a whisper. But you said. You promised. Things change. My father cut in, his voice hardening. The economy is uncertain. We have to protect the business. It's supporting all of us.
But
my tuition. It's a lot of money. my mother said, finally looking at me, her eyes holding no sympathy, only a weary resignation. More than we can spare right now. Maybe next year. Or you could look at community college. Or loans. Loans. Community college. Next year. The golden ticket crumpled in my hand. The path forward slammed shut. But I got in. I pleaded, the desperation rising in my throat. I worked so hard. We know you did, my father said, standing up, signaling the end of the discussion. And we're proud of you. But sacrifices have to be made. Right now, the business is the priority. You understand. I didn't understand. Not like they meant. I understood that I was not the priority. The business was. Always had been. The promise wasn't real. It was conditional. And the condition was the business doing well enough that funding my future felt like a manageable expense, not a sacrifice. When faced with a choice between the business's bottom line and my dreams lost. Decisively. The days that followed were a blur of disbelief and despair. I called the university, deferred my acceptance for a year. My friends went off to college, sharing excited photos of dorm rooms and orientation week. I stayed home. The house felt stifling. My parents acted like everything was normal, occasionally mentioning how expensive college was these days, nodding sagely as if this was a natural setback, not a direct result of their decision. They didn't offer alternatives, didn't help me look into loans, didn't suggest ways I could contribute to the cost. It was simply off the table. I felt a deep, aching void open up inside me. It wasn't just about the money. It was the betrayal. The feeling of being cut loose, abandoned on the shore, while the ship of my dreams sailed away. The home that had felt solid now felt fragile, built on a foundation of figures and profits, not unconditional love. I needed a job.
Any job.
Not just for money, but for escape. To feel like I was moving, doing something, anything, instead of drowning in disappointment. I worked retail, flipped burgers, cleaned offices. Anything to earn, to save, to feel productive. The money wasn't much. Tuition seemed like a distant, impossible mountain. The deferred acceptance felt increasingly like a cruel joke. Next year turned into the year after, and the year after that. The dream faded, replaced by the grim reality of scraping by. My parents occasionally asked how work was going. They'd tell me about a new store opening, a successful marketing campaign, rising profits. The irony wasn't lost on me. Their business thrived while my future stalled. They saw my struggle, but it didn't seem to move them. Or perhaps they saw it as a lesson, a way to toughen me up. Like the world owed nobody a living. They were right in a way. The world owed me nothing. But I thought my parents owed me something. Something more than this. The resentment simmered, a low, constant heat in my gut. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about value. Their values. Their priorities. It felt like they had looked at me and looked at a balance sheet and chosen the sheet. I started to see them differently. Not as heroes who built something, but as people consumed by it. The business wasn't a means to an end. It was the end itself. It demanded loyalty, sacrifice, and in return, it offered security, status, a sense of purpose that seemed to eclipse everything else, including their child. One day, while working a double shift at a diner, wiping down counters sticky with spilled syrup, a customer left a magazine. It was a business journal. I picked it up during a quiet moment, just to flip through. An article caught my eye. It was about franchise systems, about how they work, the relationship between the parent corporation and the individual franchisees, the transfer of ownership, the valuation process. Something clicked. A tiny spark in the darkness. My parents owned multiple franchise locations, but they didn't own the whole system. They paid fees, followed rules, answered to the larger corporation that held the reins. The real power, the real money, wasn't just in running a few stores. It was in owning the network. The spark grew into a flicker. What if? What if the path wasn't around their world, but through it? What if I stopped trying to get them to open a door for me and instead built my own door right into the heart of their world? The idea was audacious, impossible, but it planted itself in my mind, a stubborn seed. I started reading everything I could get my hands on about franchises, corporate structures, business law, finance. During my breaks, late at night after work on the bus. It was slow going, jargon-filled, complex. But I was driven by a new kind of energy. Not the hopeful energy of pursuing a dream, but the cold, sharp energy of purpose. I got a new job. Not in a bakery, but related. A distribution warehouse that supplied goods to various food service franchises. It was hard physical work, long hours, minimum wage. But it was a foot in the door of the system. I learned about supply chains, logistics, inventory management. I listened to the truckers, the floor managers, the sales reps. I learned about the pressures, the inefficiencies, the things that made a franchise succeed or fail from the ground up. I saved every penny, every extra shift, every bonus, every tax refund. It wasn't for tuition anymore. It was for something bigger. Something I didn't dare name out loud yet. The goal was so far away it felt fictional. But the act of saving, of planning, felt like building armor. Layer by layer. Years passed. The ramen noodle diet was a constant. My clothes were old and worn. I didn't go out, didn't take vacations. Every decision was filtered through the lens of the goal. Is this necessary? Will it help me get there? If not, cut it out. It was a monastic existence, stripped down to the essentials. Work, study, save. My relationship with my parents became strained, distant. They saw me working these manual jobs, still living at home. I paid rent, religiously, a point of pride, and I think they saw a failure. A cautionary tale. They'd make comments about settling, about not aiming high enough. They still talked about the business, its growth, its success. They never mentioned the university application, the broken promise. It was as if that part of my life had never existed. And in their eyes, maybe it hadn't. Maybe I was just the child who didn't measure up, who didn't have the grit they did. Their dismissal fueled me. Every casual slight, every patronizing question about my little jobs, added another brick to the wall of my resolve. They thought I was stuck. They thought I had given up. Let them think that. It was better that way. I moved out eventually. Got a tiny, cheap apartment. It felt like freedom, even with the constant financial pressure. Now, my home was truly mine. The silence was deafening at first, after years under their roof, within earshot of their lives. But it was my silence. And in that silence, the plan grew clearer, sharper. I took night classes. Business administration, finance, legal studies. I wasn't a traditional student, young and carefree. I was tired, focused, driven by a singular purpose. The concepts weren't abstract theories. They were tools, weapons. I learned about corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, leveraged buyouts. The language of power. I met people. Not friends, not really. Contacts. People in the industry, people who understood finance, people who knew the franchise world from angles I didn't. I was careful, guarded. I didn't share my full story, my ultimate goal. I asked questions, listened, learned. I built a network, piece by careful piece. I learned about the parent company that owned my parents' franchise system. Its structure, its financials, its leadership. Like any large corporation, it had its strengths and weaknesses. I studied its history, its market position, its debt load. I looked for vulnerability. It took years. Years of working punishing jobs, years of living frugally, years of studying late into the night, wired on cheap coffee and sheer determination. There were moments of despair, moments when the goal seemed utterly insurmountable. Moments when the loneliness was a physical ache. Moments when I wondered if the price I was paying was too high, if the person I was becoming was someone I even wanted to be. Cold, calculating, defined by a past hurt. But then I would remember that conversation in the living room. The flat refusal. The priority given to the balance sheet. The casual dismissal of my dreams. And the cold fire would ignite again. This wasn't just revenge. It was about reclaiming something fundamental. My worth, perhaps. My agency. My future, built on my terms, not contingent on their approval or their fluctuating profits. My parents, meanwhile, seemed oblivious. They were doing well, expanding. They bought a bigger house, took nicer vacations. From the outside, they were the picture of success. They occasionally called, usually just to share their news or complain about something trivial. They still didn't ask about my life, not really. Not beyond a superficial, "How are you?" which didn't require a real answer. I kept my answers vague. Working.
Fine. Saving.
They assumed it was for a down payment on a modest apartment, or perhaps a used car. They never suspected. I found a weakness in the parent corporation. A confluence of factors. An aging leadership, recent failed expansion attempts, a specific debt structure, maybe a key investor looking to exit. It was complex, requiring a deep understanding of finance and market timing. It wasn't a simple purchase, it was a strategic acquisition. It would require significant capital, far more than I had saved. This was the turning point. The years of saving and planning led to this moment. I needed outside money. Serious money. This is where the network I built came in. I had to reveal my hand, at least partially, to potential investors. I had to pitch the opportunity, the viability, the potential return. And I had to convince them that I was the one to execute it. A young woman with no conventional business background, who had started in a warehouse, now aiming to acquire a multi-million-dollar corporation. It was terrifying. Putting myself out there, risking rejection on a scale far greater than a university application. But I had done the work. I knew the numbers, the market, the risks, and the potential rewards better than anyone. I had lived and breathed this industry from the ground floor up. I wasn't just a finance person. I understood the actual business, the bakeries, the supply chain, the struggles of the franchisees. I could see the inefficiencies, the opportunities for growth that the current corporate leadership was missing. I pitched. I was rejected. I refined my pitch. I pitched again. I faced skepticism, doubt, outright dismissal. But I was relentless. I had nothing else. This was everything. And slowly, glacially, it started to work. One investor listened seriously. Then another. They saw the plan, the numbers, the quiet determination. They saw someone who understood the trenches, not just the boardrooms. They saw potential. And they saw the angle, a fragmented, underperforming asset ripe for a shakeup. My personal story, while not the focus, became part of the narrative, the hungry outsider who knows the system intimately. It took months of due diligence, legal work, negotiations, securing financing. It was a high-stakes game, played out in hushed phone calls and anonymous corporate offices. My life was a double life. Outwardly still just grinding away, inwardly orchestrating a seismic shift. I hired the lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in complex corporate acquisitions. He was sharp, pragmatic, and saw the unique nature of the situation. He understood the need for discretion, for timing. We worked in secret, building the case, assembling the offer, navigating the legal labyrinth. My parents remained oblivious. I visited them occasionally, the visit strained, filled with the usual surface-level chatter. I felt a strange mix of guilt and anticipation. They had no idea the storm that was gathering, guided by my hand. The acquisition process reached its final stages. The offer was accepted by the shareholders. The financing was secured. The legal documents were drawn up. All that remained was the formal notification, the transfer of ownership. My lawyer advised a formal meeting. Professional.
Clean.
No room for emotional outbursts, though he knew and I knew that emotion would be at the heart of it. But it had to be handled through the proper channels. It was business, after all.
They taught me that.
I scheduled the meeting through their business line, stating it was regarding franchise operations, vague enough not to alarm them, specific enough to warrant their presence. They probably thought I was calling about an issue at one of their stores, or maybe seeking advice. And so, I found myself sitting across the polished table, the stale air heavy, the documents crisp and official in my hand. My lawyer silent beside me, their lawyer smug and unaware. I laid out the papers and watched their world collapse. My father stumbled back from the table, knocking his chair. It clattered loudly on the floor, the sound sharp in the stunned silence. Impossible, he rasped, his face pale, slick with sweat. You don't have this kind of money.
Where?
How? Years of saving, I said, my voice steady, cool. It felt strange hearing myself, detached. And investors who believed in my vision for the future of the franchise system. Your vision? My mother scoffed, finding her voice, though it was trembling. What do you know about running a franchise system? You worked in a warehouse. I know more than you think, I replied, meeting her furious gaze. I've seen the system from the ground up. I understand the challenges the franchisees face, the inefficiencies in the current structure, the opportunities for growth the parent company has missed. Opportunities one planned to capitalize on. Their lawyer finally found his voice, though it was strained. This can't be right. We weren't notified of any such acquisition process. There would have been filings notices. The acquisition was handled through a series of private equity firms and shell corporations for strategic reasons, my lawyer explained smoothly. All perfectly legal, I assure you. The transfer is complete. The relevant notifications are being sent out to all involved parties as we speak, including the franchisees. My parents' eyes widened further. The franchisees. The people they managed, the people who looked up to them. They would all know. Their authority, their position, evaporated overnight, replaced by mine. Why? My father whispered, his voice broken. It wasn't a question about the business now. It was personal. I looked at him, at my mother. The pain was still there, deep inside, a dull ache. But the dominant feeling was something else. A cold, hard certainty. You taught me the value of the business, I said. You showed me that the bottom line was the most important thing. That sacrifices had to be made for the health of the system. You made your priorities very clear. I paused, letting the weight of my words land. I learned my lesson, I continued. And I applied it. The future of this franchise system is the priority now. And that future belongs to me. My mother started to cry, silent tears tracking through her makeup. My father just stared, his face a mask of devastation. The man who had built an empire, who had sacrificed his relationship with his child for it, had just watched that empire taken by the very child he sacrificed. The irony was brutal, absolute. Their lawyer was trying to talk to them, but they weren't listening. They were locked in their own private hell, the collapse of their professional lives tangled with the wreckage of our personal one. I felt no joy, no triumphant surge of victory, only a profound, bone-deep weariness, and a cold, quiet satisfaction that was less about having won and more about not having lost, not having been broken by their choices. I had taken their refusal, their dismissal, and forged it into armor, into a weapon. The meeting ended quickly after that. Their lawyer scrambled to pick up the pieces, to understand the extent of the damage. My parents were silent, stunned. As we stood to leave, my mother looked up, her eyes red and swollen. How could you do this? She whispered, the accusation sharp despite the tears. I met her gaze. I did what I had to do, I said, to survive. We walked out, leaving them in the silent, heavy room with their shattered expectations and the cold reality of the documents. The air outside felt fresh, clean. The city sounds rushed in, vibrant and alive. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing it in. It was over. The years of struggle, the planning, the secrecy. Done. The aftermath was messy. Legal battles, though ultimately futile. Public perception within the franchise community. Their personal fallout. They lost not just the control of their locations, but their standing, their identity tied so closely to the business. They tried to fight, to find loopholes, but the deal was solid. My lawyer had ensured that. They tried appealing to me, through intermediaries at first, then directly. Pleas, accusations, attempts to rewrite history. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The conversation in the living room years ago had said it all. Taking over the parent company was complicated. It wasn't just about owning it, it was about running it. about implementing the changes I had planned for years. It was hard work, different from the physical labor of the warehouse, but demanding in its own way. Long hours, difficult decisions, managing people who had been there for decades, navigating the politics of a corporate structure. I brought in new leadership where needed, streamlined operations, invested in areas the previous management had neglected. I focused on supporting the individual franchisees, understanding their challenges, building a stronger relationship with them. It was strange, being in charge of the system that had once felt so distant, so powerful, so unattainable. Seeing the financials, the contracts, the inner workings. It demystified the empire my parents had revered, revealing it as just a business, with its own set of problems and opportunities. My parents. I heard things. Through the grapevine, through mutual acquaintances who didn't know the full story. They were struggling. Financially, emotionally. The loss of the business was devastating for them. It was their identity, their security, their life's work. They blamed me, of course. Painted me as a villain, ungrateful and ruthless. Maybe I was in their eyes. Did I regret it? It's not a simple question with a simple answer. I had achieved a level of financial security and professional success I never could have imagined when I was scrubbing floors at the diner. I had proven myself. I had built something real, something mine from the ground up, even if that up meant acquiring something already established. I was independent. Truly independent. But the cost. The cost was everything else. The possibility of a normal family relationship, however flawed it might have been. The naive belief in unconditional love. The simple dream of going to college and studying history. That dream had been sacrificed not once, but twice. First by them, then by the path I chose to respond. The business thrived under my leadership. We expanded into new markets, launched new product lines, improved franchisee profitability. I was good at it. The years in the trenches, learning the system from the bottom up, gave me an edge. I understood the practical realities in a way pure corporate types didn't. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm reviewing reports or walking through a bustling new bakery location, I think about that day in the conference room. Their faces. The shock, the betrayal in their eyes. They felt betrayed, just as I had felt years before. Was it justice? Or just a cycle of pain? I don't know if they ever truly understood why I did it. Not just the money, the power, but the deep, aching need to prove that I had value, that my future mattered, and that I wouldn't be defined or limited by their choices. That I could build my own door, even if it meant tearing down the walls they had erected. The bakeries smell the same. The bread is warm, comforting. But now, when I walk in, I see the numbers behind the smell, the logistics behind the display, the corporate structure that underpins it all. It's different. It's mine. I am successful. I am independent. I am powerful in the way they always understood power. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, the victory feels empty. The empire is built, but I stand in it alone. The tuition was never paid, not in the way I dreamed, but the lesson it taught me was far more expensive and far more valuable. If this story hit close to home, or if you've ever felt this kind of turning point, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.